Well, here we are again, out here on my favorite Indian rock. In general, you'll find for crappie fishing, you know, the smallest line you're probably ever going to use is 2-pound test, okay? And maybe the biggest line most people are going to use is going to be 8, maybe 10 in some situations where they're doing some techniques. But most people, for the biggest majority of people, I think most people tend to settle in on a 4-pound or a 6-pound line, okay? Those two work great. You can't really go wrong with either one, 4 or 6. If you go down to 2, it's getting a little bit light, you know. For some things it's okay, and it may be even preferred, but just depends. It's a little bit more sporting and it's a little bit more challenging to use 2-pound test line. So for starting out, beginning crappie fishermen, go with 4-pound or 6-pound monofilament would be good. Now what I use is an 8-pound test. It's a Berkley Trilene XT big game mono. I use that on kind of a long pole. It's about a 9-foot pole, and for you guys that have seen the videos, you've seen me use it before. And I like to make really long casts with it, or at least I like to have that ability to make those really long casts. So with that, it presents a fair amount of wear and tear on the fishing line. I use this big float, this big weighted float. It's it's pretty big, as you see here. It's a heavy weighted float. So with that big pole, slinging this big float, it's a lot of wear and tear on the line. If I tried to use 2-pound test, slinging this big float the way I do, it would snap. I mean, it would just snap the line like that. Just snap. It's like that right there. Snap. And my float would go pew, and I'd never see it again, probably. So you have to use something a little more durable. I've tried 4-pound test, snap. I've tried 6-pound test. I can get by with 6-pound test okay, but still eventually snap. So I settled on 8-pound, and this Berkley big game Trilene is really, it's about exactly where I need to be. I haven't had any of these problems with the line breaking, you know, where you're trying to make a long cast. You're putting a lot of force into it, you know. When you may want to make a long cast, you know, you sometimes have to put a lot of force into it and sling that bait out there. If things go wrong, you know, with a light line, you can snap it, you know, pretty easy there. So with that in mind, just to keep going over the technique a little bit, like I said, I use this big float, and on this float I've got some swivels connected. I got a swivel there and I got a swivel on the bottom. So what that allows me to do is tie my line directly to the swivel, so I don't have to use the snap of the float, which I don't necessarily like to snap a float onto my line. Sometimes it's okay, it's not a big deal, but for what I'm doing, that wear and tear that the float being snapped on there creates, eventually it wears down your line there. At least it does for me. So by putting these swivels on here, that gives me a chance to run my 8-pound monofilament down to the top swivel, and on the bottom swivel, instead of coming off with the 8-pound monofilament, I come off with 4-pound test of my choice. So so in essence, this becomes a leader below the float, and it's dripping gooky stuff all over me out of the float right there, folks. So in essence, below the float is a leader, 4-pound test leader, and I'll usually run that maybe anywhere from 8 to 9 feet, you know, just depending, you know, somewhere around 8 feet most of the time. So when you see me out there with that big 9-foot ugly stick, on that rod I've got the 8-pound test on my Fluger President reel, and it works out great. I don't have any problems with this line. It's the Berkley Trilene XT green 8-pound test. Cheap, inexpensive. You can get it at Walmart. They almost always have it in stock. So it works for me, you know. I mean, it's up to you as far as what you want to do with fishing line. You know, I know people that spend a lot of time thinking about fishing line. They buy a lot of different types of fishing line. They try different fishing lines. I've seen a lot of those guys on their fishing videos break off a lot too. So it's no guarantee that you're going to figure things out. I'm not saying a certain fishing line is not, you know, more suited for a particular application than another fishing line, but you just have to sort of figure that stuff out.